With chapter number 20, Locomotion and Movement. Movement is one of the significant features of living beings. Animals and plants exhibit a wide range of movement. Streaming of protoplasm in unicellular organisms like amoeba is a simple form of movement. Movement of cilia, flagella, and tentacles are shown by many organisms. Human beings can move limbs, jaws, eyelids, tongue, etc. Some of the movements result in a change of place or location. Such voluntary movements are called as locomotion. While walking, running, climbing, flying, swimming are one of the some forms of locomotory movements. Locomotory structures need not to be different from those affecting other types of movements. For example, in paramecium, cilia helps in the movement of food through cytopharynx, and in locomotion as well. Hydra can use its tentacles for capturing the prey and also use them for locomotion. We use limbs for changes in the body posture and the locomotion as well. We the above observations suggest that movements and locomotion cannot be studied separately. The two may be linked by stating that all locomotions are movement, but all movements are not locomotions. Methods of locomotions performed by animals vary with their habitats and the demand of the situation. However, locomotion is generally for the search of food, shelter, mate, suitable breeding grounds, favorable climatic conditions, or to escape from the enemies or predators. Types of movements. Cells of the human body exhibit three main types of movements, namely amoeboid, ciliary, and muscular. Some specialized cells in our body, like macrophages and leukocytes in blood, exhibit amoeboid movement. It is affected by pseudopodia formed by the streaming of protoplasm as in amoeba. Cytoskeletal elements like microfilaments are also involved in amoeboid movement. Ciliary movement occurs in most of our internal tubular organs, which are lined by ciliated epithelium. The coordinated movements of cilia in the trachea helps us in moving dust particles and some of the foreign substances inhaled along with the atmospheric air. Passage of ova through the female reproductive tract is also facilitated by the ciliary movement. Movement of our limbs, jaws, tongue, etc. require muscular movement. The contractile property of muscles are effectively used for locomotion. And other movements by human beings and majority of multicellular organisms. Locomotion requires a perfect coordinated activity of muscular, skeletal, and neural system. In this chapter, you will learn about the different types of muscles, their structure, mechanism of their contraction, and important aspect of the skeletal system. Muscle. You have studied in chapter 8 that the cilia and flagella are the outgrowth of the cell membrane. Flagellar movements helps in the swimming of spermatozoa, maintenance of water current in the canal system of sponges, and in locomotion of protozoans like euglena. Muscle is a specialized tissue of mesodermal origin. About 40 to 50% of the body weight of a human adult is contributed by muscles. They have special properties like excitability, contractility, extensibility, and elasticity. Muscles have been classified using different criteria, namely location, appearance, and nature of regulation of their activities. Based on their location, three types of muscles are identified. First is skeletal, second is visceral, and third is cardiac. Skeletal muscles are closely associated with the skeletal components of the body. They have a striped appearance under the microscope and hence are called striated muscles. As their activities are under the voluntary control of the nervous system, they are known as voluntary muscles too. They are primarily involved in locomotory actions and changes of the body postures. Visceral muscles are located in the inner walls of hollow visceral organs of the body like the alimentary canal, reproductive tract, etc. They do not exhibit any striation and are smooth in appearance. Hence they are called smooth muscles or non-striated muscles. Their activities are not under the voluntary control of the nervous system and are therefore known as involuntary muscles. They assist, for example, in the transportation of food through the digestive tract and gametes through the genital tract. As the name suggests, cardiac muscles are the muscles of heart. Many cardiac muscle cells assemble in branching pattern to form a cardiac muscle. Based on appearance, cardiac muscles are striated. They are involuntary in nature, as the nervous system does not control their activities directly. Let us examine a skeletal muscle in detail to understand the structure and mechanism of contraction. Each organized skeletal muscle in our body is made up of number of muscle bundles or fascicles held together by a common collagenous connecting tissue layer called fascia. Each muscle bundle contains a number of muscle fibers. Each muscle fiber is lined by plasma membrane called sarcolemma enclosing the sarcoplasm. Muscle fiber is syncytium as the sarcoplasm contains many nuclei. The endoplasmic reticulum, that is sarcoplasmic reticulum of the muscle fiber, is the storehouse of calcium ions. A characteristic feature of the muscle fiber is the presence of a large number of parallelly arranged filaments in the sarcoplasm called myofilaments or myofibrils. Each myofibril has alternate dark and light bands on it. A detailed study of the myofibril has established that the striated appearance is due to the distribution pattern of two important proteins, actin and myosin. The light bands contain actin and is called I band or isotropic band, whereas the dark band called E band or an isotropic band contains myosin. Both the proteins are arranged as rod-like structures parallel to each other and also to the longitudinal axis of the myofibrils. Actin filaments are thinner as compared to the myosin filaments, hence they are commonly called thin and thick filaments respectively. In the center of each I band is an elastic fiber called Z line which bisects it. The thin filament are firmly attached to the Z line. The thick filament is the A band are also held together in the middle of this band by a thin fibrous membrane called M line. The A and I bands are arranged alternately throughout the length of the myofibril. The portion of the myofibril between the two successive Z lines is considered as the functional unit of contraction and is called a sarcomere. In a resting state, the edges of thin filaments on either side of the thick filaments partially overlap the free ends of the thick filaments, leaving the central part of the thick filaments. The central part of the thick filament not overlapped by a thin filament is called the H zone. Structure of contractile protein. Each actin or thin filament is made up of two F or filamentous actins helically wound to each other. Each F actin is a polymer of monomeric G or globular actins. Two filaments of another protein, tropomyosin, also run close to the F actins throughout its length. A complex protein, troponin, is distributed at regular intervals on the tropomyosin. In the resting state, a subunit of troponin masks the active site or active binding site for the myosin on the active filament. Actin filaments. Each myosin or thick filament is also a polymerized protein. Many monomeric proteins called meromyosins constitute one thick filament. Each meromyosin has two important parts, a globular head with a short arm and a tail, the former being called the heavy meromyosin HMM and the latter the light meromyosin LMM. The HMM component, that is the head and the short arm, project outwards at the regular distance and angle from each other from the surface of a polymerized myosin filament and is known as the cross arm. The globular head is an active ATPase enzyme and has binding sites for ATP and active sites for actin. Mechanism of muscle contraction. Mechanism of muscle contraction is best explained by the sliding filament theory, which states that the contraction of a muscle fiber takes place by the sliding of the thin filaments over the thick filaments. The muscle contraction is initiated by a signal sent by the central nervous system or CNS via a motor neuron. A motor neuron along with the muscle's fiber connected to it constitute a motor unit. The junction between a motor neuron and the sarcolemma of the muscle fiber is called the neuromuscular junction or motor end plate. A neural signal reaching this junction releases a neurotransmitter or acetylcholine, which generates an action potential in the sarcolemma. This spreads through the muscle fiber and causes the release of calcium ions into the sarcoplasm. Increase in calcium ion levels leads to the binding of calcium with a subunit of troponin on the actin filaments and thereby remove the masking of active sites for myosin. Utilizing the energy from ATP hydrolysis, the myosin head now binds to the exposed active sites on actin to form a cross bridge. This pulls the attached actin filaments towards the center of A band. The Z line attached to these actins are now pulled inwards, thereby causing a shortening of the sarcomere, that is contraction. It is clear from the above steps that during shortening of muscle, that is contraction, the I bands get reduced, whereas the A bands retain the length. The myosin releasing the ADP and a P or phosphate goes back to its relaxed state. A new ATP binds and cross bridge is broken. The ATP is again hydrolyzed by the myosin head and the cycle of the cross bridge formation and breakage is repeated, causing further sliding. This process continues till the calcium ions are pumped back into the sarcoplasmic cistern, resulting in the masking of actin filament. This causes the return of Z lines back to their original positions, that is relaxation. The reaction time of the fibers can vary in different varying. Activation of the muscles can lead to the accumulation of lactic acid due to anaerobic breakdown of glycogen in them, causing fatigue. Muscle contains a red color oxygen storing pigment called myoglobin. Myoglobin content is high in some of the muscles, which gives a reddish appearance. Such muscles are called the red fibers. These muscles also contain plenty of mitochondria, which can utilize the large amount of oxygen stored in them for ATP production. These muscles therefore can also be called aerobic muscles. On the other hand, some of the muscles possesses a very less quantity of myoglobin and therefore appear pale or whitish. These are white fibers. Number of mitochondria are also few in them, but the amount of sarcoplasmic reticulum is high. They depend on anaerobic process for energy. Skeletal system. Skeletal system consists of a framework of bones and a few cartilages. This system has a significant role in movement shown by the body. Imagine chewing food without jaw bones and walking around without the limb bones. The bone and cartilage are specialized connective tissue. The former has a very hard matrix due to calcium salt in it, and the latter has slightly pliable matrix due to chondroitin salts. In human beings, this system is made up of 206 bones and a very few cartilages. It is grouped into two principal divisions, the axial and the appendicular skeleton. Axial skeleton comprises 80 bones distributed along the main axis of the body. The skull, vertebral column, sternum, and ribs constitute axial skeleton. The skull is composed of two sets of bones, cranial and facial, that totals to 22 bones. Cranial bones are 8 in number. They form the hard protective outer covering, cranium, for the brain. The facial region is made up of 14 skeletal elements which form the frontal part of the skull. The single U-shaped bone called hyoid is present at the base of the buccal cavity, and it is also included in the skull. Each middle ear contains 3 tiny bones, malleus, incus, and steps. collectively called ear ossicles. The skull region articulates with the superior region of the vertebral column with the help of two occipital condyles or dicondylic skull. Our vertebral column is formed by 26 serially arranged units called vertebrae and is dorsally placed. It extends from the base of the skull and constitutes the main framework of the trunk. Each vertebra has a central hollow portion, neural canal, through which the spinal cord passes. First vertebra is the atlas and it articulates with the occipital condyles. The vertebral column is differentiated into cervical 7, thoracic 12, lumbar 5, sacral 1 fused and coccygeal 1 fused regions starting from the skull. The number of cervical vertebrae are 7 in almost all mammals including human beings. The vertebral column protects the spinal cords, supports the head, and serves as the point of attachment for the ribs and musculature of the back. Sternum is the flat bone on the ventral midline of the thorax. There are 12 pairs of ribs. Each rib is a thin flat bone connected dorsally to the vertebral column and ventrally to the sternum. It has two articulation surfaces on its dorsal end and is called as bicephalic. First 7 pairs of ribs are called true ribs. Dorsally they are attached to the thoracic vertebrae and centrally connected to the sternum with the help of hyaline cartilage. The 8th, 9th and 10th pairs of ribs do not articulate directly with the sternum but joins the 7th rib with the help of hyaline cartilage. These are called vertebrochondral or false ribs. Last two pairs, that is 11th and 12th of ribs, are not connected ventrally and therefore called floating ribs. Thoracic vertebrae, ribs and sternum together form the rib cage. The bones of the limbs along with their girdles constitute the appendicular skeleton. Each limb is made up of 30 bones. The bones of the hands, forelimb are humerus, radius and ulna. Carpals, wrist bone 8 in number, metacarpals, palm bones 5 in number and phalanges, digits 14 in number. Femur, thigh bone the longest bone, tibia and fibula, tarsals, ankle bones 7 in number, metatarsal 5 in number and phalanges, digits 14 in number are the bones of the legs or hind limb. A cup-shaped bone called patella or patella cover the knee ventrally or kneecap. Pectoral and pelvic girdle bones help in the articulation of the upper and lower limbs respectively with the axial skeleton. Each girdle is formed of two halves. Each half of the pectoral girdle consists of a clavicle and a scapula. Scapula is a large triangular flat bones situated in the dorsal part of the thorax between the second and the 7th ribs. The dorsal flat triangular body of scapula has a slightly elevated ridge called the spine, which projects as a flat expanded process called the acromion. The clavicle articulates with this. Below the acromion is a depression called glenoid cavity, which articulates with the head of the humerus to form the shoulder joint. Each clavicle is a long slender bone with the two curvatures. This bone is commonly called the collarbone. Pelvic girdle consists of two coxal bones. Each coxal bone is formed by the fusion of three bones, ilium, ischium and pubis. At the point of fusion of the above bones is a cavity called acetabulum to which the thigh bone articulates. The two halves of the pelvic girdle meet ventrally to form pubic symphysis containing fibrous cartilage. Joints. Joints are essential for all types of movements involving the body parts of the body. Involving the bony parts of the body. Locomotory movements are no exception to the joints. To this, joints are points of contact between bones or between bones and cartilages. Force generated by the muscles is used to carry out movement through joints where the joint acts as a fulcrum. The movability at these joints vary depending on different factors. Joints have been classified into three major structural forms, namely fibrous, cartilaginous and synovial. Fibrous joints do not allow any movement. This type of joint is shown by flat skull bone which fuse end to end with the help of dense, fibrous connective tissue in the form of sutures to form cranium. In cartilaginous joints, the bones involved are joined together with the help of cartilages. The joint between the adjacent vertebrae in the vertebral column is of this pattern and it permits limited movements. Synovial joints are characterized by the presence of a fluid filled synovial cavity between the articulating surfaces of the two bones. Such an arrangement allows considerable movement. These joints help in locomotion and many other movements. Ball and socket joint between humerus and pectoral, knee joint, pivot joint between atlas and axis, gliding joint between the carpals, and saddle joint between carpal and metacarpal of the thumb are some examples. Disorders of muscular and skeletal system. Myasthenia gravis, autoimmune disorder affecting neuromuscular junction leading to fatigue, weakening and paralysis of skeletal muscle. Muscular dystrophy, progressive degeneration of skeletal muscle mostly due to genetic disorder. Tetany, rapid spasms while contraction in muscle due to low calcium ions in body fluid. Arthritis, inflammation of joints. Osteoporosis, age related disorder characterized by decreased bone mass and increased chances of fractures. Decreased level of estrogen is a common cause. Gout, inflammation of joints due to accumulation of uric acid crystals. Let us begin with summary. Movement is an essential feature of all living beings. Protoplasmic streaming, ciliary movements, movements of fins, limbs, wings, etc. are some forms exhibited by animals. A voluntary movement which causes the animal to change its place is called locomotion. Animals move generally in search of food, shelter, mate, breeding ground, better chance, better climate, or to protect themselves. The cells of the human body exhibit amoeboid, ciliary, and muscular movements. Locomotion and many other movements require coordinated muscular activities. Three types of muscles are present in our body. Skeletal muscles are attached to skeletal elements. They appear striated and are voluntary in nature. Visceral muscles present in the inner walls of visceral organs are non-striated and involuntary. Cardiac muscles are the muscles of the heart. They are striated, branched, and involuntary. Muscles possesses excitability, contractility, extensibility, and elasticity. Muscle fiber is the anatomical unit of muscle. Each muscle fiber has many parallelly arranged myofibrils. Each myofibril contains many serially arranged units called sarcomere, which are the functional units. Each sarcomere has a center A band made of thick myosin filaments and two half I bands made of thin actin filaments on the either side of it marked by Z lines. Actin and myosin are polymerized proteins with contractility. The active site for the myosin on resting actin filament are masked by a protein troponin. Myosin head contains ATPase and has ATP binding sites and active sites for actin. A motor neuron carries signal to the muscle fiber which generates an action potential in it. This causes the release of calcium ion from sarcoplasmic reticulum. Calcium ion activates actin which binds to the myosin head to form a cross bridge. This cross bridges pull the actin filament causing them to slide over the myosin filaments and thereby causing contraction. Calcium ions are then returned to the sarcoplasmic reticulum which inactivate the actin. Cross bridges are broken and the muscles relax. Repeated stimulation of muscles leads to fatigue. Muscles are classified as red and white fiber based primarily on the amount of red colored myoglobin pigment in them. Bones and cartilages constitute our skeletal system. The skeletal system is divisible into axial and appendicular. Skull, vertebral column, ribs, and sternum constitute the axial skeletal. Limb, bones, and girdles form the appendicular skeleton. Three types of joints are formed between bones or between bone and cartilage, fibrous, cartilaginous and synovial. Synovial joints allows considerable movements and therefore play a significant role in locomotion.